So our next reader is Amelia Gray. Amelia Gray is a badass. She lives and writes in Los Angeles, has a lot of connections in Chicago. She has published 3 books. The most recent book, Threats, was a finalist for the PEN/Faulkner Award, and it is tremendous. Her other 2 books are AM/PM, put out by Featherproof Books, and Museum of the Weird, which is just that. So I'm really excited to have Amelia here. I'm really excited to be introducing her, so I'm going to stop doing that and just let her read. Amelia Gray, everybody.
I smoke all the like smoking Joe Frazier, the Hellraiser, raising hell with the flavor.
Thanks. Thank you, Caleb, and thanks, Jody, and thanks to all of the Pygmalion Fest. The rest. Okay. Oh my God. All right. So far, so good. Okay, so I'm going to read 3 short stories. I write very short stories, so it won't be very long, and they're quite new. They're very new. I wrote one 2 weeks ago. So. Be weird if I just barfed when I was down there. Sorry. Okay. This is called In the Moment. It had been a memorable date, particularly after such a long line of failures. Turns out they had hidden the same punk tapes in the back of their closets as teenagers and had always secretly wanted to work as photographers for nature magazines. Neither had been to Europe, and both dropped an ice cube in their morning cup of coffee. Her name was Emily, a name she hated, but Mark found it reminded him of reading picture books with a flashlight beneath the covers in his childhood bed. Emily was the name of a girl hero whose intrepid adventures took her around the world and even underground. It was a far better name anyway than his own, Mark, a name which regularly conjured the image of a bucket of black paint thrown against a prison wall. They were both morally but not financially satisfied with their current mid-level organizational positions. They'd already discussed the subject at length the week before during a non-profit conference where they met, and hoped to strike out on their own someday individually. Or together, Mark said, raising his glass. Things were going really well. I was hoping you would come up, she said once they were outside her apartment. Boy, howdy, he said. And so began their first evening together, in the elevator and then tumbling over the bed and in a pile of her clean laundry, and later, unpleasantly wedged between the oven and the refrigerator, in a move she claimed was solely for luck. He was fascinated by her textures, a rough spot on the side meat of her buttock, the thin rumpled place on the back of her hand where she had burned herself with oil. She had a little round mass the size of a ball bearing in her left breast. All of this was new to Mark, and he was happy to experience it. Your body is tremendous, she said after. He didn't feel that his body was much beyond a device which propelled him from breakfast to dinner. It featured a growing paunch and a knee which tricked up before wet weather. And he nearly told her so before realizing that she was happy with him and trying to be kind. And it had been so long since a woman had tried to be kind with him that he was immediately lulled into a peace with her, and they fell asleep right there in the bathtub. A series of successful dates followed. They decided that when they were old, they would buy an RV and take it around the country to attend garlic festivals and state fairs. She brought a bale of fresh hay home from the farmer's market so they could experience what it felt like to take a role in it. Mark felt in short order that he loved Emily and that he was afraid to lose her, and the two thoughts butted up against one another unpleasantly and spoiled an entire evening because he couldn't eat his dinner for watching her and then fainted on the way into the cab and woke up in her living room, confessing his fears to her while she held a cloth against his forehead. We are connected in this manner, and I am afraid, he was saying. She swabbed his brow. You must practice the act of connection without attachment. Think of us as two stones together at the bottom of a shallow stream. We jostle against one another. She pushed him gently on the shoulder to illustrate the concept of jostling. Eventually the stream pulls us apart, she said, or covers us with a fine silt. That seems bad. When you truly understand it, though, it will remove all suffering. She dropped the washcloth into a bowl of cool water she had prepared. His limbs were too heavy to reach for her, and so she stripped him from the waist down right there on the couch and did all the work. Her breast brushed against his cheek, and he visualized the lump inside as a pebble in a stream, which he might observe without attachment. They made vacation plans and trips to see her parents, and he moved his things into her apartment. Mark felt closer to Emily than he had felt to any other person living or dead since grade school, when he and a group of boys formed a secret society in the woods behind the Dairy Queen. He tried to imagine himself at 8 years old there in the woods and projected himself in his imaginings into his body and mind and tried to tell that boy that not 30 years later he would meet a woman who would give him such a feeling of peace. The young boy listened and then called his older self a gay lord, and Mark said, "Fair enough, young Mark, I have become a gay lord of love." Sorry. He went to the mall and brought Emily a pendant on a long silver chain and presented it to her and recited some Fleetwood Mac lyrics about running into the shadows. And Emily put the necklace on and said it was fine, and they moved in together and split their expenses. He liked to cook, and she took out the trash. They both cleaned the bathtub on occasion. It was a pretty good setup. Whenever he faced a setback at work, for example, when his coworker came back from England and put a poster of Stonehenge up over the window and Mark couldn't see the street anymore, Emily reminded him to view the present as a wild element divorced from the past and future. If he could place himself in the moment of sitting in the office without recalling the past or anticipating the future, he might see the outside light through the poster through a greenish shade over their cubicle corner and gave the impression that they were viewing the world through a stained glass. "I'd have to remember a time I stood before a church window," he said, thereby entering the past. "This is not what that's about," she said. And he saw that she was right because he couldn't remember what any of it was about and so already felt better about the poster thing. They were watching Korean language television at the time. An accident from the cable provider resulted in them only receiving Korean language television, but after a few disorienting days, they found it was highly comforting to observe the dramas without context, and they watched them as children watch adults, taking cues from laughing or weeping alternately and mirroring the gestures. He forgot that they had gone grocery shopping the day before and came home with bags of nectarines to add to the rotting pile. Cartons of eggs stacked up in the fridge, and she speculated that she could make a quiche, but had distanced herself mentally from the recipe she knew, and so cracked the eggs in a pan and poked them listlessly on the stove until they burned, and she had to throw them out. "We should go out with our friends this weekend," he said. "We don't have friends," she said. The house phone rang, and he picked it up. "Is my daughter there?" a woman asked. Mark realized after a moment, in English. "Who is your daughter?" "Emily is my daughter," she said. "Are you her new boyfriend?" He was quiet, turning over the idea that Emily had a mother. He imagined a whole gloomy family tree, and then imagined taking a chainsaw to the tree and sitting on the stump, listening to Fleetwood Mac on a cassette player and waiting for the wood to dry so he could burn it. He pulled the phone out the wall and threw it in the recycling, and then picked it out of the recycling and put it in the trash. She followed his lead on clearing the place, and at turns brought out to the curb a jar of olives, curtain rods, ice cube trays, an electric guitar, a vacuum cleaner, silverware, her baby pictures, a bag of shampoos collected from hotel rooms, and the hay from the farmer's market, which she stuffed into 3 paper bags. She hired men to remove the couch and the TV, and when she had no cash for payment, they additionally removed a box of silver jewelry. At work, he stood with his nose to the Stonehenge poster until a woman from Human Resources asked him to take a walk with her. She said that his performance had been going sideways lately, and they were looking for someone moving in a more vertical direction. The words coming out of her mouth didn't make sense, and Mark tried taking context clues from the contents of the picture frames in her office. Before she gave him his benefits package, she had to ask him to stop chanting. The walk home was so satisfying, so perfect in the movements of the small animals and in the appearance of flaws in the street, flaws that on further thought were so perfectly placed that they were proof of a grand design created for his witness. He sat down on the sidewalk to observe the way a banner flapped against a store awning. He sat that way for a few hours, leaning against a mailbox. He returned home to find Emily sitting on a milk crate in the middle of their empty apartment. She was naked from the waist up and examining her bra. "What do you think this is?" she asked, turning the cup over so he could observe the constellation of blood. "I have no idea." And indeed, though he combed his memory with a fine tooth, the only lice he turned up were the strange memories out of place. A hornet lighting on the upper corner of his crib and disgorging the first paper layer of its nest. A woman kneeling before a man, both robed in white. A boy seeming to leap from his bike to bounce off the hood of a passing car. I can't even imagine. Thanks.